All right, thanks, Dennis. Thanks for sticking with us today. We're so excited to put together this robust programming. Learned lots of interesting things. I've learned a thing or two myself, so much appreciation to all of our speakers today. Our final speaker is Gary Coover, a trained civil engineer originally from the mainland. Gary has long had a keen interest in building histories and historical landscapes. He has researched over 2,000 properties in Texas, Arkansas, and Hawaii. He is the editor and publisher of Rolston Press with nearly 50 titles in the catalog, including many showcasing the history of Honolulu's Chinatown and downtown. We have some copies of those at our office, so if you're not familiar with those, definitely talk to Gary afterwards. I've learned so much taking a look at those booklets. His book on Chinatown history recently won a preservation award from the Historic Hawaii Foundation, and his Downtown Honolulu book has just been nominated. His newest book is about Honolulu's Royal Mile. Gary will share his experiences in identifying and researching historic buildings in Hawaii, along with an extensive list of sources. So thank you, Gary. Thanks to everyone, and here we go.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you all for sticking around. I know it's
Sorry, last piece.
now I'm official. Feels much better. Thank you all for sticking around. I know it's hard to make it through a long day on a Saturday, but recently, as you mentioned, done a lot of research in Chinatown and downtown, and had just really great fun doing it. And I want to share with some of y'all some of the things I found while doing that, as well as how you can go about researching your particular building. Every building does have a story, and I think it's really important that historic buildings are kind of the repository, or as well as the touchstone of a lot of our cultural history. And once a building is gone, you go, what used to be there? Well, the stories that were associated with that are also gone. So these buildings right here, we have the oldest building in Chinatown in this photo, not the one you're thinking, this guy up here. We have a building that was designed by the same architect who did Iolani Palace. Of course, this one here, Thomas Baker from Australia. The Iolani Palace was built by a guy named Ted Thomas, E.B. Ted Thomas, and he's the one who built this building 4 years later after he built Iolani Palace. We have, this building is unfortunately gone, but this was where Alexander Baldwin, you saw the A&B building earlier, that's where they first started. Was in this building. It's also the second building for Dillingham Corporation. And the Elks Club even had it for a while. And then of course, this was named after a famous Hawaii Five-O villain, Woke Fat. It actually means peace and prosperity. And I don't know how they turned that name into a villain's name when they did the TV show, but the Woke Fat building is sort of the cultural and then the spiritual center of Chinatown. So I think Don has talked a lot about the importance of historic buildings and the various reasons why we need them, why I think culture needs them. I've spent many years in Houston, and there are not many historic buildings left, and I think the city is a lot poorer because of that. And a lot of people say, well, I have an old building and what's historic about that? Just an old building. Well, you need to think about the criteria that Don talked about. He mentioned integrity. Now, integrity is sort of the concept of major and minor sins. If you have, most buildings aren't exactly the way they were built, say in 1890. A few things have changed. But if those changes are very minor and they're reversible, generally you can still get registered, so that's okay. Sometimes if they've taken out all the windows and put in big, huge plate glass stuff, that's probably going a little bit too far. And so a lot of buildings I'm going to show you today have had various changes done to them. And I think really the most important one is, would anyone consider it a place worth saving? Like, I think that's a really cool building over there. I wish somebody would hang on to it. And it may not be 50 years old. It may be some really great architectural thing. You go, that is awesome. Every time I walk by it, I like seeing it. That's an important thing to keep in mind with some of these old buildings. So, you have seen this building already in this presentation, but you probably don't recognize it. They're very excited. Here's the gleaming product at Fort and King. This was in the 1960s, 1962, I believe. The British Overseas Airways Corporation remodeled this building, and they thought it was beautiful. Well, in the 30s, this was what the building looked like. In the 20s, that's what it looked like. And when it was built in 1890, that is what it looked like. So the question is, which one of these would be considered worth saving? And the end result is none of them. It's now just an empty courtyard where it could have been that. This is absolutely classic East Lake Victorian architecture. It's a fantastic building. The Mont Smith building, built on the site of a dentist, Mont Smith's first office. This is at the corner of Fort and Hotel. It started off as a 2-story building, and they later added a 3rd story when they remodeled it in 1897, and a slight update. This was the first electric elevator, passenger elevator in Honolulu, 1897. And it went up to Frank Davies' photography studio on top. They later remodeled the building again, and in the 50s it got this treatment. And does anybody know which building this is today? Is any of the original 1885 building in there? I have no idea. Maybe 1 or 2 bricks in the back. Now this building is in Chinatown. It looks almost exactly the way it did when it was built in 1888. It's the Perry Block. It was built by a woman, actually, the widow of Jacinto Pereira, who became known as Jason Perry, as his name got anglicized. And this one was the Perry Block, corner of Hotel and Nuuanu. Once again, East Lake Victorian architecture. Restored in the 70s, but still retains an incredible amount of its integrity. In going through the Historic Building Task Force notes from the mid-1965, I think is when they did that, somebody actually did the research on this building. They went into the probate records for the Perry family, and they found this notation about, okay, we have E.B. Thomas, who we know is the contractor, and we have a J.A. Palmer for services. And like, well, what in the world is that? Then we have Cecil Brown. Cecil Brown was kind of the attorney that was handling the affairs of the Jason Perry estate. So, okay, we know what he did. The J.A. Palmer, kind of a mystery. Until I found another story in a paper that talked about E.B. Thomas, contractor from designs by J.A. Palmer. Okay? Well, I did some research in the newspapers, and J.A. Palmer was just a business agent. He did bookkeeping and other stuff. And so this is one of the caveats about doing historical research, is that there are mistakes in the original historical record. Because we find an ad for Palmer and Richardson, and they're doing East Lake architecture, it's the first on the list. And there's J.A. Palmer again, but you look in the city directory, it's I.A. Palmer. And it turns out the architect did these 3 buildings in Chinatown. Absolutely classic East Lake Victorian. If you've seen Victorian furniture, it's got these incised medallions. So all these buildings have their own little unique patterns. The Perry Block, the T.R. Foster building, which is the Black Shamrock Saloon now, and then the Royal Saloon, which is Murphy's. And these are some other buildings in Honolulu that Isaac Palmer designed. Unfortunately, all gone now. We've seen this one. This was the Cartwright building for Alexander Joy Cartwright. Was he the founder of baseball? Some say he was. The Bethel Street runs through there right now. This was the Hochschlager building. This was the Cummins building, later Castle and Cook. And this was the Robinson building. This is where the little statue of young Sun Yat-sen is in Chinatown. I finally found a picture of the guy when he was with the Wisconsin Volunteers in the Civil War. And I talked about buildings having stories attached to it. You learn about the people who built the buildings, the people who designed them. I found with Palmer, his 6th great grandfather was the upkeeper of the Nonsuch Palace in London that was built by Henry VIII. I never thought I'd find a connection to Henry VIII in Honolulu. Well, the contractor that built the Murphy's building, Thomas B. Walker, also from England, he had fought with the British in Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia. He went to Cheyenne, Wyoming, And he really wanted to, he hung out with Wild Bill Hickok, and he knew George Armstrong Custer. And he wanted to ride with Custer to Bighorn, but Custer wasn't leaving yet. So he went on what was called the Battle of Powder River, which was basically a massacre of a village, got wounded. The day he got back to Cheyenne was the day that Custer got killed at Little Bighorn. Then he ran into Ted Thomas somewhere in San Francisco, and then came to Honolulu and built many buildings. I never thought I'd find a connection to Custer and Wild Bill Hickok. And once again, it all comes from just researching these buildings and who built it. So you find stories the more you dig and the more you look around. Well, this is the photograph that really kind of got me started in Chinatown. This is from the 1886 fire. Most people don't know much about that. It was a huge fire. Started by a couple of gamblers. They were fighting over some scraps of paper. They fell on fire. A fight ensued. They burned pretty much all of Chinatown and almost downtown. And we were looking down King Street, Eva, and in the middle from Nuuanu, Eva on King Street. And I thought, that building looks kind of familiar. So I actually got in my car, drove downtown, stood, well, during a red light, stood at the corner right in this exact location. And sure enough, the same massing, the same form, the same little, it had been altered, but it's obviously the same building. And it turns out, it's this building, corner of Nuuanu and King. When it was built, it looked like this. It's coral blocks. It's designed by Theodore Hoyk, who designed the Iolani Barracks. And this building was built in 1864. There's a cornerstone with a time capsule. We know what's in it. We don't know where it is. Well, it's in the corner, right? But which corner? Nobody knows. But it's the big box full of all kind of cool stuff. And Yuktong Char, Chinese architect, did the remodel in 1939, but they didn't remodel the side of the building that's next to the Nipujiji building. So if you walk by the street and you look up, you are looking at 1864. Got a question?
Regarding to the fires in Chinatown, what happens if a registered historical building like burns down or has an accident? Is it going to be rebuilt, or are we going to completely like make a new building?
That's probably up to the owner to decide what to do. It will be delisted, of course, if it's damaged beyond repair. But if they want to repair it, they have to put it back pretty much the way it looked before. You can't, or if you add too much new crazy stuff, then it will become delisted. It will no longer have the integrity. Well, I'll show you a building in a little bit that did go through one of the fires. And then the main occupant of the Robinson building was that we mentioned Chono Fung, the first Chinese millionaire here in Hawaii. And there's another picture of his house. He was involved in the bringing laborers from China. He had a dry goods business. He also had the opium license, the state-issued opium license in the 1870s. He paid the equivalent of $500,000 a year for that license, and he still made money. Howleys like me couldn't get opium. But the government decided that was a cultural part of the Chinese community, and they should be allowed to have opium, and that's where he made a lot of his money. And it said that he would take his gold bars in a wheelbarrow and take them down to the Bishop Bank. A very, very beloved character. Everyone really liked Chono Fung. Jack London wrote a book about him. Don Amici was in a Broadway play that was also based on part of the life of Chono Fung. There also were Japanese businesses in Chinatown. Some of these old photographs you can see, and you can get sometimes to help read the Kimura building, the Sunita building, the Nipujiji, and this was the Hawaii Hochi on the lower right. There were also Portuguese buildings. I'm surprised. You think Chinatown, oh, it's all Chinese. Well, no, it was only about 50% Chinese. A lot of Portuguese, a lot of other people there. It was the working class part of town right by the docks, so there are a lot of different people there. And part of the history of Chinatown were known as boogie houses, and the phrase was called climbing the stairs. And these were houses that, it's kind of funny, prostitution was illegal, but it was regulated by the police department. Because this was a matter of, everyone was concerned about having all these lusty sailors and military guys in town, you had to protect the local women folk. So you had to allow this to happen. And they restricted it to Chinatown. And it was kind of the second floor of all these buildings. And I actually found this photograph from a sale online. And these are sailors actually waiting to climb the stairs. Well, Jean O'Hara got crossways with the police, and she wrote an expose, which kind of helped bring the whole thing down. And it all went away officially, shall we say. But, oh, yeah, this building right here, a fellow named James Jones used to hang out there. He was an author. He wrote a book that was considered one of the best novels of the 20th century. It was made into a film that was nominated for 13 Academy Awards and won 8. And the movie was called From Here to Eternity. And that's all based on his experiences on a building. A very boring, okay, set of building. I go shopping at some of the stores below it. I had no idea that the second floor was the inspiration for all of this. Once again, it's the building that has all these stories associated with it.
Yeah, I have to just throw in one thing. In the movie, it's called the Congress Hotel, which it's surprising that would get through the censors.
Yes, the new Senator Hotel became the new Congress Hotel, which is even better of a name. And a lot of it was filmed in Hawaii, but it didn't film any of the building stuff in Chinatown. That was all filmed on a soundstage. Now this building's kind of just a basic 1886 building built after the fire in Chinatown, owned by a Supreme Court Judge, Richard Bickerton. But most people know this building from its later incarnation as Club Hubba Hubba. And it's kind of the history of Chinatown because you have, in the 50s, you have Western hillbilly music playing there. And then you have, I think it's like Japanese dancers of some sort. And then you have burlesque with an accordion. I never thought of an accordion as a sexy instrument. And then you get, of course, strippers galore. I always wondered what Judge Bickerton would have thought about that in his building. And next door you have the Swing Club, which also started off doing country western stuff. That must have been really big here in the 50s. Of course, in the 60s you got Go-Go Girls in Cages. John Holmes, adult film star, got arrested here when he was about 20 years old for lewd acts on stage. He went to California, and that's when his film career really got started. But I love the fact that this guy played at the Swing Club. Little Johnny Shaw, 36 inches tall, full of soul, the James Brown of the dwarf set. So every time I walk by that building now, I think about these various things that were associated with this particular structure. Now this was long gone, unfortunately, but I was surprised to find that Billie Holiday had performed here for a week in Honolulu, as did Louis Armstrong, Harry the Hipster, Anita O'Day, all kinds of famous jazz performers in the 50s. It's now just a courtyard in front of a dim sum restaurant. I mean, if the building were still there today, it would probably definitely be on the register for all the events that happened there. Hard to believe that Queen Emma grew up in Chinatown. She grew up on Nuuanu Street. This was the house, it was Dr. Rook's house. She was the Hanai daughter of Dr. C.B. Rook. The house was later torn down. It turned into they built the Liberty Theater on the site. And today we have this beautiful parking lot. It was put in as a temporary parking lot in 1995. That was only 30 years ago. So that's, I guess temporary is 30 years plus. So you see the parking lot. There's no story associated with the parking lot. All the history of Queen Emma, Dr. Rook, and all the things that happened there. The Liberty Theater had trained leopards. It had Dame Clara Platt singing baritone. It had Mei Lan Fong, the greatest actor in Chinese history, performing there. And now it's just a parking lot. So once again, when you lose an historic building, you lose so much of the stories behind it. This particular building is one of the few places we know it's been there since at least 1813, which was a grass house that looked very much like this, built by a sea captain named Captain Nathan Winship. It was later torn down and a coral stone house was built here, owned by a guy named Isaac Montgomery, and he hired a young whalerman to work for him for a little while, a guy named Herman Melville, who left Hawaii, became a novelist, wrote a book called Moby Dick that you've probably heard of. This is where he would have briefly lived. So I always think of this building as the White Whale when I see it, because it's a white building. It's called the King Liberty Building now.
Awesome.
Yeah. So another building in Chinatown, Dr. Sun Yat-sen briefly stayed in the apartment above there. Sun Yat-sen, they talk about the overthrow of the monarchy here in Hawaii. This guy overthrew a dynasty in China with a lot of help from Chinese businessmen here. There was a lot of plotting and scheming. There was a lot of financial assistance. And if walls could talk, I'd be curious what went on in that upstairs room right there. But in that same building, we have the wonderful story of Koichiro Miyamoto, which is known as Musashiya, the shirt maker. He had a clothing store during World War I. He ordered all this English broadcloth to make shirts with, didn't hear back. So he sent another order, didn't hear back. Sent another order to England, didn't hear back. He had 5 orders in. As soon as World War I ended, here came all 5 orders of cloth, and he was absolutely swamped. He had no idea what to do. So he hired a local newspaper man, George Mellon, to come up with some kind of advertising campaign. And Mellon was fascinated by the broken English, the pidgin English that Miyamoto spoke. So he created this alter ego character called Musashiya the Shirt Maker. These wonderful ads in broken pidgin English. It just became, it was a meme, I guess, or it went viral. Movie stars shopped at his store. Shirley Temple shopped there. Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, all those guys shopped there. And one thing that he was famous for was he took Japanese yukata cloth and he made it into what he called aloha shirts. This is the very first ad for an aloha shirt ever seen in the newspapers in 1935. So was he the one that created the Hawaiian or the aloha shirt? Well, there we have Elric Ethel Chun. Also, it's where it's on King Street across from the Hawaii National Bank. And they actually, in 1936, trademarked the name Aloha Shirt. And what Ethel Chun did, she used Hawaiian designs for the shirts. They did kind of palaka type shirts, and they were hugely popular. So between the two of these, we have basically the invention or the creation of the very popular, worldwide popular Hawaiian shirt. But, I walk by these buildings now and, their shop would have been down here somewhere. But then also doing the research on this, I mentioned Clifford Young earlier. He did the redesign of this building. Clifford Young used to hang out with Mao Zedong when he lived in China. Who would have thought you'd find a connection to Mao Zedong in Chinatown? So the real question is, where do you look to find some of this information? Because it's not just, you don't just walk into a store and there it is. That was one thing I found was that with Chinatown, a lot of information was missing, a lot was incorrect, and a lot just hadn't really been found yet. And the really good news is, historical research has changed so much in the past few years. I didn't have to stick my head in a microfilm thing. I didn't have to dig through. I did a project in Houston, Texas, where I was in a warehouse with big dusty books and a bunch of guys in orange jumpsuits, and their job was to look after the warehouse. You don't have to do all that. There's so much is online right now. And it's very important to go with original sources versus the published sources you find. If you find a book that someone wrote in the 60s or 70s, don't necessarily trust that unless they've got good references, or you go to the original sources yourself. I use basically maps, photographs, and newspapers. They have, the University of Hawaii has wonderful fire insurance maps that show very accurately the footprints of all the buildings. Sometimes you'll find a newspaper story that talks about so-and-so is about to start this building. And at the archives, they have a tremendous collection of old photographs. And the nice thing about these photographs is that's exactly where that picture was taken. So that brings that piece of the map to life. You can see, it's not just a rectangle. Oh, it's really some pretty cool buildings. So once again, you've got text with newspapers, you have ads, and if you're lucky, you get the occasional sketch or photograph of a building that's going up. And you can get it for free, the Library of Congress. It's chroniclingamerica.gov or some kind of long name like that. Or you can have a subscription to newspapers.com, which is, they go back to 1840 in Hawaii, and they're searchable. I don't know how old newsprint is searchable, but it is. And it's about 85% accurate, probably. Yeah, 23 newspapers. They had a lot of newspapers back then. And you could cut out, very easily just take a little excerpt out of it. And there also were Chinese newspapers. There were two Chinese newspapers, kind of the one on the side of Dr. Sun, and then the one that were known as the anti-Sun newspaper. So this is the Hawaii State Archives. Don't be fooled. It says archives, but it's actually the building in back where you go to look, and they have all sorts of great stuff there. A lot of good online presence too. You can search photographs. You can find a lot on the, and they're very high quality photographs. This was the first ever photograph, or earliest known photograph of Chinatown. And these are some of the other pictures that were taken in 1900, about the time they had the 1900 fires. Oh, he's gone. Well, you can tell him that he missed this building here. It's just kind of a plain, dumpy looking building, right? It's not well kept, and it's kind of a fire trap. Well, it actually was a survivor of the 1886 fire. They had iron shutters on the side, which are still there, unbelievably. But they closed the iron shutters, but the fire came in through the roof. It burned a hole through the corrugated roof. And they said the building was like a burning cauldron within. And they couldn't get the water into the building because the shutters were closed. But after it was all said and done, they decided the building was still structurally sound, and they rebuilt it the way it looks today. Now, going to the State Archives, this is what it looked like originally. It was the Pico block built by Manuel Pico, a Portuguese businessman, and he actually lived in back. And we also have, what's so cool is we have a photograph of the inside of the building when it was the Hollister drugstore. So once again, a building that originally I thought, this is not even worth putting on a tour, turned out to have a very rich history. So these are just some of the various maps. This is all the same area of the Robinson building there on these corners. And so you can go through the maps, you can do overlays, you can sift and sort, you can kind of learn a lot of information from just the geography of where things are located. This is a piece of Chinatown. This is Mauna Kea, Eva to Nilotic Street between 1891 and 1914. So after the 1900, I say fires, there were 10 fires in 1900. They rebuilt everything, and you can kind of track how, when did buildings first show up, and how did the area develop. The archives also has work permits and passenger lists, so they wrote down the name of every passenger that came in on a boat. And if you're researching Chinese history, that is pretty much worthless, because it's some guy like me, some alley guy, writing down the name of some Cantonese guy, and I don't write Chinese, so I just write down what I think it sounds like. So you have all these lists, and good luck trying to figure out what the Chinese name really was. The State Land and Survey Division has maps that you can download. And this is property ownership maps based on the, basically the original property lines from the 1848 Mahaley, and you can find out where some of the, you can read some of the documents about the land ownership. It's where I learned that the word Dunderhead actually existed in 1848, because they were trying to establish who owned a certain piece of property. And during the interview process, the lady called her husband a dunderhead for selling this piece of land to some alley guy. And he said, no. And she said, how can you sell the king's land? And he said, no, I traded it for a set of sails for our boat. But she called him a dunderhead. I thought it was pretty cool. You go to the Bishop Museum. Once again, you don't go in the front, you go in the back. And back there somewhere, and then you go up to that floor, and that's where you can research things. They have a tremendous photograph collection there. And you can also refer to things like old paintings. There's a lot of information. This is from a gentleman named Emmert, who was a Swiss, Paul Emmert, who was a Swiss artist who lived here in Hawaii. He drew incredibly realistic sketches of buildings. And the one reason I know that is this little thing right here. That's the Robinson warehouse. And James Robinson put a figurehead of his ship on the top of his warehouse. And that's it right there. So this guy's attention to detail is phenomenal. This is 1854. And he did about 100 buildings in Honolulu, which I think only 4 are still standing. The Hawaii Chinese History Center. It's a little tiny room. It's about this big. Tremendous amount of information. Douglas Chong is just a wealth of information. They have a book on how to research your Chinese roots. If you're looking for Chinese history, they're the people to talk to. Of course, the Hawaii State Library has a wonderful Pacific Reference Room. And UH at Manoa has a really good room upstairs. The Hamilton Library, the Pacific Room, a lot of copies of Paradise Pacific, a lot of other good publications up there you can go through. They also have the fire insurance maps online that were done just certain years, but it gives you a real snapshot of what was where when. And that's all. You can all download that too now. They also have city directories. Back in the day, back before phone books, they had city directories where they listed who lived in town, and they often listed their occupation. And you would see someone who's a huckster, which is a salesman, or an oyster shucker. I've ever seen that. You can learn a lot about some of the people as you're researching, going through these old city directories. And they also have ads for a lot of the businesses in here. The Land Commission Awards. This is some fascinating stuff. You're going through and you're reading the people trying to, when they decided that the king no longer owned everything, we're going to carve it all up, but you've got to prove that it's yours. So they had these interviews with various people trying to decide who lived there or whose fence this was or this, that, and the other. Some really interesting stories of a lot of Hawaiian history wrapped up in these documents, and that's all available online. Okay, this particular one, this site, right in front of the Eaton Place, right across from the High Sam or Capitol Modern, I guess it is now. Little piece of land there. It's where the Black Cat Cafe was during World War II. Now there's nothing, but before there was a Chinese bakery here, and the owner had just recently died of drowning coming into the harbor. And I've never seen this in the documents, but they appealed to the king's generosity and said that this guy Amau was such a upstanding citizen, and he left behind a widow and 2 children, that they beseeched the king to give this land to the widow out of his generosity, and he did. So that was pretty cool. A really interesting story on this little, little courtyard now. Yeah, this is a weird one. Cemetery records, findagrave.com, because back in the old days, people like E.B. Thomas, it's just the letters E.B. Well, what's that? Well, you can search maybe and you find, oh, it was Edwin B. Thomas. Or I can find people's names, or you sometimes find their death date. You can go to the newspaper, find the obituary. So it's kind of a surprising thing to research, but it can lead you to find other things. And then there's clues in the landscape. And I'm not talking about the building on the right or the building on the left. I'm talking about the building in the middle, which is it's my favorite building in town. It's about this wide. Because what this is, it's that building. It's all that's left of the 1883 James Campbell building. And they tore it down and built some big brutalist thing in the 60s. But seeing that little sliver of a building made me want to know more about it. So once again, even though that's just a little sliver, to me it had history, it had a story. Let's find out what that is. Back to the Perry block again, and the big clue was in the newspaper that the keystones over the windows have the Portuguese coat of arms in the keystone. Next time you walk down the building, you'll probably take a look and go, oh yeah, that's the Portuguese coat of arms, and your friends will be so amazed that you knew that. Or even a real obscure one with this building. If you look at this building, this piece of parapet is a little bit different from the others, which tells you, oh, this piece was added later. Aha, okay, then that gives you a clue to research what happened, when was that added. And this building, this is one of my favorite buildings. I love the flagpole. I've never seen anything on that flagpole. And in 1905, the newspaper talked about the gambling results being posted on the Mauna Kea flagpole. And I'm convinced that that's that same flagpole. Because they would, twice a day, they'd run this flag, everyone would row and see if they won this big gambling raffle kind of thing. Okay, this doesn't look real interesting, right? Just a stone wall. Well, in 1900, when they burned this block of buildings for the plague, they discovered the wall. And no one at the time had any idea what it was. And it turns out it is actually on the line of one of the Mahale land documents. And it was the Tuakola land claim, and in Hawaiian, that word could also mean 5 generations. So does that mean the wall is 5 generations? I don't know. But I'm thinking this is probably the oldest thing in Chinatown, is this stone wall or a remnant of an old land division. Now, there's also the Honolulu GIS, which is real good for finding who owns a certain property. It gives information about building permits if it's more recent. It'll give you square footage, so things like that. One thing you absolutely cannot trust, it gives you the TMK maps, which are very good showing the ownership. You absolutely cannot trust any of the dates you see on the GIS. Here's the Lifelong building again. Oh, here we go, it was built in 1913. No, built in 1880. Effective year built 1929. I have no idea what that means, but that means nothing. Because the building is 1880, it was redone in 1885. So yeah, don't accept that as gospel. Family and oral histories, treat those with a huge grain of salt. I know in my own family, we have a photograph of a great-grandfather. He's in a Civil War uniform holding a rifle and all this kind of stuff. And the family history was that he was on Sherman's March to the Sea. Well, I did a little bit of research and looked up his unit, and I never got below Virginia. And apparently he had a hand that was mangled in a threshing accident, and he was a cook. So, in this case, here we have it's a fictionalized history that Ham Chun came up with on La Aliang. There's a building with his name on it down in Chinatown. And she took the family history document that she had and kind of created a spurious mythology and kind of an historical fiction. I found a very different person in the newspapers. He was constantly blocking the sidewalk. He was constantly getting arrested. He was like this total scofflaw. Nothing like the story in the book. And don't trust historical markers either.
I did some of them, I'm afraid.
Did you do this one?
Yeah.
But this one's got 4 mistakes on it.
I didn't do this one.
4 mistakes in bronze on the side of a building. That was not the name of the restaurant then or now. The fire did not happen at that restaurant because the restaurant burned up. The flames did not burn for 3 days. And they talk about after the 1900 fire, everyone had to build back in brick or stone. That was not true. They had a big debate about it, but that was not required. So once again, when you find data, try to get 2 or 3 different directions. Try to determine, what is the true story. So if you're looking at downtown or Chinatown, I've done some of that prep work for you in these 2. This is about 1,000 pages added up. Pretty much every building in downtown and Chinatown. So if you're looking at those sort of buildings to do research, this will get you a good start. Each kind of is by each building. Most important thing is housekeeping. Keep records of all your data. Make Microsoft sort for you if you're using a PC. In my case, for all the newspaper stuff, when you save it from newspaper.com, you get the newspaper and the date. But I add a little bit of stuff in front of what it is, and then I put the date in front. Oops. So it sorts by date. I can skim through real fast and find stuff, or I can search by keywords. And like I say, if you have an historic downtown, like Chinatown, wouldn't it be wonderful if it could look like this? This is my vision of Chinatown in the future, and other historic properties. If these buildings were all gone, as they almost were in the 60s, they were going to wipe out Chinatown, widen King Street, it would have all been just a bunch of boring office buildings, I guess. But look, what a wonderful amenity an historic facility can be if it's respected and treated right. And I want to just leave you with that and hope have good luck researching. I hope you find lots of really cool stuff. Thank you.